In mid-February on this show, we aired this piece of tape of a Tea Party leader in Washington state discussing Senator Patty Murray of Washington.
Now, how many of you watched the movie Lonesome Dove? What happened to Jake when he ran with the wrong crowd? What happened to Jake when he ran with the wrong crowd? He got hung. Well, that's what I want to do with Patty Murray.
What happened to Jake when he ran with the wrong crowd? He got hung. That's what I want to do with Patty Murray. That happened at a Tea Party event in Washington state in mid-February. Today, a Washington state man was arrested for his threats to kill Senator Patty Murray. He's a 63-year-old Yakima, Washington man. He was reportedly so enraged by his opposition to health reform that his regular litany of what were described as vulgar and abusive messages for Senator Murray turned explicitly violent and threatening when health reform passed. Quote, "There's a target on your back now. It only takes one piece of lead. Kill the expletive senator. Now that you've passed your health care bill, let the violence begin." Quote, "I hope somebody gets through your security and blows your expletive brains out." Quote, "I hope somebody puts an expletive bullet between your expletive eyes." Quote, "I want to expletive kill you." Quote, "I do believe that every one of you expletive, socialist, democratic, progressive expletives needs to be taken out." The FBI managed to find and arrest the caller who left those messages this morning. They are charging him with threatening a federal official. After getting a subpoena to trace the man's blocked telephone number, an FBI agent called the man's phone number and pretended to be from the anti-health reform group Patients United Now. You'll remember that Patients United Now is part of Americans for Prosperity, the Koch industry-funded group that spent a good deal of the last year organizing those hands-off-my-health-care rallies. Well, during the course of that call from the FBI agent, the affidavit in this case says the suspect, quote, repeatedly expressed his strong dislike for the recent health care reform legislation and, quote, confirmed that he regularly placed calls to Senator Murray's and Senator Maria Cantwell's offices. He also told the FBI agent that, quote, "I do pack," as in I carry a gun, "and I will not blink when I'm confronted," and that is a guarantee. It's not a threat, it's a guarantee. "I pack a .38, and if somebody says, I will not blink." He will not blink. The FBI determined that the man did indeed have a .38 revolver that was registered to him. He also had a valid concealed weapons permit. Today also, Congressman John Lewis of Georgia released a sample of what he has faced from opponents of health reform. This is a voicemail that Congressman Lewis released today.
"I ain't getting the health insurance. That gonna go tell me I gotta get some health insurance. I ain't paying a fine. Tell that to come put my in jail if you don't like it. All them other voted for that Obama and all them white trash honkies that voted for that communist socialist stuff. Dumb motherfucker. I ain't getting a mandatory health insurance stuff. God, bunch of white trash honkies. Some communists vote for the I ain't gonna fight no war, so I could be forced to do something I don't want to do. So all y'all you John Lewis, God worthless communist.
We also learned today of an arrest in Texas after a 27-year-old man declared that he intended to use deadly force to stop abortions from being provided at a specific named clinic that provides abortions in Dallas, Texas. Oddly, the man made the threat in a court filing. He was trying to file a complaint against the Supreme Court demanding that the Supreme Court make abortion illegal immediately. In this hoopty filing, the man said, quote, "I will try to stop an abortion using oral words, and if words are not enough, I will use physical force if necessary, and if anyone tries to physically stop me, I will overcome that force, and if I must use deadly force to defend the innocent life of another human being, I will." The man then stated that he was headed to this clinic in Dallas. He was arrested. He has been charged with transmitting an interstate communication containing a threat and using a threat of force to intimidate the employees of a reproductive health services provider. And that last one is a law that only exists because of the organized and extreme long-standing anti-abortion movement in this country, a portion of which preaches force and intimidation to get what they want. In the midst of this climate right now in the country, conservative gun rights advocate are organizing armed shows of force in state capitals around the country, culminating with what they say they wish could be an armed march on Washington on April 19th of this year. April 19th of this year, of course, not only the anniversary of the Waco disaster, not only the anniversary of the start of the American Revolution, but most recently the anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing by anti-government extremist, militia-affiliated gun rights enthusiast Timothy McVeigh. That bombing was on April 19th, 1995. There will be an armed group marching on April 19th of this year in Virginia, just across the Potomac from downtown Washington, D.C. They say they're getting as close as they can legally get to Washington with loaded weapons. Simultaneously, on the grounds of the Washington Monument, there will be the Second Amendment March, unarmed but only reluctantly so. As a lead up to that event on the Oklahoma City anniversary, the Second Amendment March group is holding an armed march in Virginia at the state capitol in Virginia. The featured speaker is Virginia's Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli, who, of course, is the right-hand man of Virginia Republican Governor Bob McDonnell, who today declared April to be Confederate History Month in Virginia. It is news days like this that remind me that when somebody says to you, "May you live in interesting times," they probably mean it as a curse. Joining us now is Zachary Roth, senior reporter with Talking Points Memo. Zach, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to ask you about an anti-abortion connection between two of those events that I described today. There's the guy arrested in Texas, right? But then there's also the man arrested in Washington State. One of his messages to Patty Murray is reported as having been, "Baby killer Murray, I hope somebody gets through your security and blows your expletive brains out, you expletive, baby killing, expletive, expletive." Do we know how connected the radical anti-abortion movement is to other forms of anti-government extremism?
We don't know absolutely, but what we do know is that when, for instance, George Tiller was murdered last year by a radical anti-abortion protester, many abortion rights groups were saying they'd noticed an uptick in this kind of violent language and rhetoric, and that there seemed to be this kind of increase in that type of activity. And of course, that baby killer phrase, as you know, relates presumably to a comment that was made by a Republican member of Congress as the health care bill was passing, where he yelled "baby killer" on the floor of the House, a Texas Republican, Randy Neugebauer. And this guy, as we saw in some of his other comments, was clearly watching the news and paying attention to the health care reform bill. So it's certainly not a stretch to think he was picking up on that rhetoric and sort of taking it a step further.
Certainly, although he doesn't have to have been quoting Neugebauer in order to have said that. That's the sort of thing that's been yelled by anti-abortion extremists for a long time. I have been yelled at and called a baby killer myself for discussing pro-choice views. The Virginia Attorney General speaking at this armed rally, Confederate History Month being declared in Virginia by the new Republican governor there. Politicians like Governor Bob McDonnell in Virginia is being sort of touted as the new face of the Republican Party. Is there a political cost that politicians like him have to consider when sort of trying to appeal to the edges in political terms?
I mean, there's certainly a political cost if he, for instance, chose to run for president, which some people in the Republican Party think he might one day want to do. Maybe there's a cost in Virginia, too, which, you know, voted for Obama and is an increasingly sort of centrist and leaning Democratic state in recent years. But there's also a cost for him, it seems like, in not going to that extreme. Increasingly, what we've seen with the Republican Party, and polls bear this out, is that Republican-based voters now the party is so sort of shrunk down to its root that in order to appeal to the people who are going to come out and vote for Republicans, you have to kind of up the crazy level a little bit, and you've seen that not just from McDonnell but from Cuccinelli as well, not only in speaking at this pro-gun march, but in trying to repeal benefits for protections that universities have in place against gay and lesbians, this Confederate History Month that McDonnell has instituted, a number of these things that seem like direct efforts to appeal to that shrinking base.
It is also striking, and again, this relates specifically to this one incident today in Washington State, the threat against Patty Murray. The FBI used the name of an actual anti-health reform group to catch this guy. Strategically, I guess, both in a law enforcement sense, does that make sense? Does that have difficult implications for the relationship between law enforcement and politics?
It might have difficult implications for this group to know that they're the one that the FBI sort of chose successfully to think that they would appeal to this kind of allegedly unhinged lunatic and that he would want to get involved with them. And if you read the transcript of some of the conversation, it sounds like he was very interested in talking to them. I mean, what also stood out to me with him was how closely he seems to have been picking up on Republican talking points in all of this stuff. So he talked about socialism, he talked about no bureaucrat is going to determine my health care. He even sort of made an oblique reference at one point to a comment that Eric Holder, the Attorney General, had made about Americans being cowardly and not talking about race. So he's, it's like he's almost like a conservative blogger or, something like that, rather than your average unhinged lunatic.
Or at least he sounds like a conservative blogger, yeah. Absolutely. Zachary Roth, senior reporter with Talking Points Memo. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks
Appreciate
for having
it.
me.